1. For background, this was about 3 years ago. I had worked at a Subway for about 2 years at this point. One super busy night, a family of 7 came in to get dinner, right after I had finished baking bread for the oncoming rush. One dad and all his kids, no other parent to keep the kids under control. His ranged from 12 to 4 years old, and Dad was ordering for all the kids, so not paying attention or trying to keep them in line. This was usual for them, as they were regulars and often come in like this. Usually never during a rush, when I have a line already. So I need to mention this was during COVID, so we could not seat people, and we have to clean after every customer. I went through each and every sandwich meticulously, making sure everything was perfect for them, down to how many pieces of lettuce went on each sandwich. Because that is how much I love this job and making people happy with their sandwich. Kids are everywhere screaming and touching anything they could get their hands on, pawing all the chips, even though Dad had told them just sandwiches tonight. Spitting on my freshly swept floor, I don't care too much because I hadn't mopped, but come on. It's COVID, and that's rude no matter where you are. Snotty-nosed kid juice everywhere, and they continue to cause trouble and mess everything up in store despite being asked very politely by me to not and getting yelled at by Dad. Dad had also been a jerk to me since walking in. The usual make-me-a-sandwich bitch type guy stuff I see every day. Anyway, I powered through it, got all sandwiches made with love, got them rung up and sent them on their way. As I mentioned, this was in the middle of the dinner rush. 30 minutes after I was done making these sandwiches, the dad came back in with 3 of the kids. While I was in the middle of helping a sweet older couple, started yelling at me how his bread was stale and hard, and he needed me to make 7 new sandwiches or give him a refund. I looked at this older couple, asked if I could step away and deal with this. And after getting their permission, I walked over to this man and asked him what was wrong. Just the bread? I double-checked to make sure that everything else was okay with the sandwich. Just fine, just the bread. He was super rude the whole time, demanding I give them free sandwiches. As I mentioned, I had just cooked bread. I did not overcook it, and I had felt it while making the sandwich, and felt that soft, holy texture that only fresh bread has. I looked straight at this man and said, "I understand and can absolutely give you a refund." Adam put his card in and gave him his money back. And usually we would give them the sandwiches anyway with their refund because we just have to throw them away anyway. But I just looked at this man knowing he has all these hungry kids and he's probably just trying to get a free meal. After dealing with him for over an hour, I'm over it. So I look him straight in the eyes and tell him have a good night and dump all the sandwiches in the trash can right next to him. Maybe a dick move on my part, but I know this man is out to dinner after every other grocery store and fast food place in town is closed. And he had his 6 hungry spawn that very obviously have not learned to control their emotions or actions yet, that he gets to deal with. The kids started crying because of no dinner, and he stormed out cussing. Never saw them again, so that was nice. And the nice old couple gave me a big tip for having to deal with that. 2. Background first. I live in a country where there are not a lot of people where I am from, specifically. Not a lot of people who have the same mother tongue as me. Also, I look like I'm from my country, but I don't look typically like I'm from my specific state. So people assume I don't speak or understand said language. So I was taking the metro back home. I was carrying a heavy bag, but I had to stand because there were no empty seats. I realized there was a young couple seated near me speaking in my mother tongue, so I was pretty delighted about it until I heard what they were saying. They were really loud and rudely judging everyone in their mother tongue. They even made a few comments about my tight green shirt. I'm from a rather conservative culture and I've seen this happen before. I've seen family members talk about people badly in our mother tongue in front of them because they're confident nobody could understand them. And I've always gotten into fights about this with these relatives for it. I'd always lose the fight because I was a kid to them and they genuinely believed that this was something innocent. So here I was, listening to this nonsense again, but this time as an adult in a foreign land. I didn't want to be abrasive, and I was far too awkward and introverted to call them out to their face, but I was furious. I needed to be subtle, so I waited for a few more stops, continued listening to them talk and giggle some more, waited till the people next to them got up and left, and then I sat down a seat away from the wife. I turned to her and, in our language, asked her, "Can I put my bag here?" And they both went silent. Her husband's soul seemed to have left his body, and she turned red, became silent for a while, and then started small talk in a very demure way because she was shocked I could speak mother tongue. The husband couldn't look at me or say a word for the longest time, and when he finally did, he spoke like he was terrified of me. Finally, right before they got off the metro, she turned to him and whispered, "I didn't expect that," in our mother tongue, turned to me, said some pleasantries, and left. I felt really accomplished that I finally got to get someone somewhere in the world to think twice before being mean, and I did it without ever being confrontational. 3. A few years ago, I was down on my luck and decided to work for a nationwide pizza chain. I had worked there at various locations and in every position, off and on since I was a teen. At this point, I was 30, so I figured my 15 years of experience should count for something. After a few months of working, I asked how I could move up to manager, seeing as how I was just as, if not more, knowledgeable than the current managers. I thought I would be a shoo-in. I was told by the regional manager that once I got a vehicle of my own, he would promote me. I found a place that would take a small down payment and lease me a car with an outrageous interest rate. I was desperate to get on my feet, and as long as the job was legit, I'd struggle all I had to in order to eventually make it up the ladder. I became a manager and immediately felt like a fool. Apparently, managers only get a $1 raise and now are expected to put up with way more crap than that $1 afforded. We had to clean the entire store in closing shift, sometimes be there until 4 a.m., etc. I was bamboozled, but it was fine. I was on a mission to escape the street life I grew up in, as I had refused to ever sell drugs again. Anyway, about a year into my manager position comes our busiest day of the year. That's right, Super Bowl Sunday. All managers were scheduled to come in at 9 a.m. in order to prep. I arrive promptly and begin the prep tasks. Being on time is something I pride myself in, but I know my coworkers are often late, so I assume they were just a few minutes behind. Unfortunately, the next manager did not come in until 10 a.m. and was clearly hungover to the point that he was no help at all. Each subsequent manager came in 1 hour after the other until all 4 of us were finally there. At this point, I'm a little upset and exhausted, but whatever, I'm a team player. We just did our jobs and kept it moving. The entire day was busy, with little to no break time. If you've ever worked pizza on Super Bowl Sunday, you can imagine the shit show I'm describing. Phones ringing off the hook, ovens packed to the brim, carry-out lobby full. My coworkers and I were like a well-oiled machine. We knew how to work with each other very well. No mistakes, no late orders, busy as hell, but we got this. Then enters the regional manager, Jeff. Jeff and I knew each other since we were teens, as we both had started with the company around the same time. He hasn't worked in a busy store in years. His primary role is to check in at various stores and ensure they had what they needed. But of course he wanted to jump in and assist us. Jeff immediately begins dropping food on the floor, packing orders in wrong boxes, routing deliveries improperly, and just about anything else he could do wrong. It was annoying, but we couldn't say anything. Jeff would blame us, rather than admit he was fucking up. At some point, I decided I could take a few puffs from my cigarette at the back of the store. After all, I had now been here 12 hours with no break. A cigarette would take the same time as if I went to take a dump, so why not? I literally took 2 puffs and threw my cigarette out because I heard the phone ringing and wanted to help. When I turned around, Jeff was staring at me like I just fucked his wife or something. Before I could say anything, he said, "Yeah, get the fuck out of here, we don't need you." Mind you, this was 2 hours before the end of my shift. I was the only person here on time. 12 hours with no break and made no mistakes at all. On top of that, I was scheduled to open the store the next morning. I simply replied, "Sure, Jeff, no worries." I went home and planned my revenge. When I came in the next morning, I put my store key on the manager desk with a handwritten note. I am no longer needed here. I quit. I took a picture on my phone and sent it to my coworkers, who I knew would still be sleeping. No one knew until a few hours after the store was supposed to open. They lost hundreds of dollars. I quickly found a better job with more pay and less responsibility. Today I make triple what I made then. Apparently he still brings me up years later, claiming that my mommy must be taking care of me. 4. My next-door neighbor is one of those people who believes he is the mayor of the neighborhood. We live on a cul-de-sac with only 7 houses. He'd berate people whose grass is taller than he feels it should be. He called the cops on me a few times if he could hear music playing outside, not loudly, and even during the daytime. The town deputy came each time, finally measured the volume level with a phone app, and told him that it was under 50 decibels and therefore permissible, and that he wouldn't come out again for the same complaint. The last straw from me was my garbage can, about 4 feet high with 2 wheels, and a handle to move it up and down the driveway. It was put out every Wednesday night, and the truck came early the next morning to empty it. The neighbor decided he didn't like where I placed it. I take mine out at night, and started moving it when he brought his own can out in the morning. It's a small thing, but I eventually decided it needed to stop. I took a turd from my cat's little box and smeared it on the inside of the handle of the garbage can. It faced away from the street, with the handle on the street side. If you looked from the yard side, you would see little globs on the inside of the handle, but from the street side it looked normal. Usually I get up a couple of hours after the garbage truck comes by, but that day I was up early and watched from an upstairs window with a cup of coffee. Neighbor wheeled his can down to the end of the driveway, crossed the street, and started to move my can. As soon as he wrapped his fingers around the handle, he jerked his hands away, saw the brown goo on his fingers, and actually sniffed them. He went totally ballistic, yelling obscenities I could hear from inside. Then he viciously booted my can into my yard, knocking out garbage bags, and then started kicking them, which scattered trash all over my lawn. He then went inside and called the cops. The same deputy arrived about 15 minutes later and spent another 15 minutes trying to calm him down. The neighbor pointed to the handles of the garbage can and kept screaming, "He put shit there, I got it on my hands." Eventually, the deputy told the neighbor to stay put and walked across the street to my house. I was already waiting at the front door when he knocked. He addressed me by my first name, since he had been called out before, and said, "Mr. Jones claimed you rubbed feces on your garbage can and he got it on his hands when he attempted to move it from the street." I, of course, had rehearsed my reply, and knew better than to deny the obvious. It's my garbage can, and I can do whatever I want to it, right? Plus, it was on my property, and he had no business touching it. The deputy was struggling to keep a straight face at this point, and, I added, he also tossed trash all over my yard, and I shouldn't have to pick it up. The deputy nodded and said, "Yep, he did admit to doing that." The deputy told me to stay on my porch and walked across the street to the neighbor, who was already asking what was going to happen to me. I couldn't hear what was said, but the deputy eventually escorted him over to my yard and watched as the neighbor picked up the trash and put it all back into the garbage can, that he had to stand back upright by grabbing the rim, not the handle. They went back to the neighbor's driveway and the deputy quietly lectured him for a couple of minutes. I have never had any issues with him again. 5. Back in 2015, I had a 2011 Dodge Caliber that was beginning to give me issues. After some research, I found out that the fuse box in the engine compartment was slowly malfunctioning and causing my car to act weird after about an hour of driving. I was on the market looking for a new car, as I basically deemed it being time to get something more suited to my everyday needs. Not long after, I found the car I was looking for, which was a Kia Sorento. I rented it when the girlfriend and I went on a trip to Seattle, and I immediately was thrown away at how much space was inside the Sorento, and that it had a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. I looked at my girlfriend and said, first thing I'm doing once we get back home is to go to Kia and get the Sorento. So once I get back home, I reach out to a family friend who is a finance manager for several dealerships, hoping he would have a contact at Kia. Instead, I get told he would call me back. My brother then calls me, says he wants to come with me to go check out Jeeps. I told him I was not interested, but he insisted that you will be happier with a Jeep. I also want to go see if I can consolidate my cars. To indulge my brother's request, I agree, and he meets me at a Mancari Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, now known as Berman, so maybe under new management since this incident. In any case, the closest vehicle they had on the lot that would even come close to the Kia Sorento was a Jeep Grand Cherokee. As I'm perusing the lot, my brother shows up with my sister-in-law. My brother driving in a 2014 Jeep Grand Cherokee, and my sister-in-law in a 2012 Kia Forte. Both of their cars appear to be in immaculate condition, and both with less than 20,000 miles. We walk in, and I get taken away by one of the sales reps, while another sales rep talks to my brother and sister-in-law. I begin to tell the sales rep that I want to trade in my car for the Grand Cherokee, and go on to say that I am trying to keep my bill under $1,000 a month. That means I want to even get a base model, as long as it has towing capabilities. I found the exact one I wanted for $45,000, which would later come up to about $53,000 after taxes and fees. We go back to his office and run the numbers, and the sales rep comes back to me if I'm willing to put another $5,000 down. At this point I was confused. I've always prided myself in having great credit and have had a very long history of always taking care of my credit. I had also explained that I was already putting $5,000 down, so why do they need another $5,000? After I say no, the guy walks away and talks to what appears to be the sales manager. After some back and forth, the sales guy comes back with the manager in tow. The sales rep sits down and the manager says, "Listen, these are Jeeps you are looking into. I won't lie to you. If you do not put another $5,000 down, you are looking at monthly bills of $1,200. That confused the hell out of me as I realized that the bill I'd pay after 60 months would be in the ballpark of $72,000. So I said, I need to see the numbers you're crunching, because this definitely does not add up. How does a bill that after everything is said and done at $53,000 suddenly equate to $72,000? The sales rep looks at the manager and the manager just looks back at the rep, just to say then, "Listen, they're Jeeps. They retain their value. If you can't afford it, then we can't help you." So I cut my losses and start heading out, when I remember that my brother was there, with a Jeep, looking to trade it in. So cue my malicious compliance. I quickly beeline straight to the office my brother and sister-in-law are in just at the right time. They had just received the appraisal reports for both vehicles, but I was mostly interested in the Jeep Grand Cherokee. As I walk in, the sales rep working with them stops and asks what I am doing, and I say, "Don't worry, I'm with them. That's my brother and my sister-in-law." So the guy doesn't mind, and just as he is about to discuss the report, the sales manager walks in and says, "If you guys aren't going to buy a car today, please leave." I look at him and say, "What's wrong?" "I just come over here to wait for my brother, to hopefully trade in his vehicles and consolidate his vehicles. I believe your sales rep just needs to discuss the appraisal report." The manager then says, "He doesn't have to discuss this in front of you." I then looked at my brother and said, "Do you give me consent to be here while the report is read?" And my brother immediately says, "Yes, that's fine." At that point, the sales manager basically grabbed the reports and tore them up and said, "We will not be doing business with you. Leave, now." Immediately after that, I called my buddy again, asked him if he worked with a specific Kia dealership I had in mind, and within 1 hour, I traded my Dodge Caliber for the Kia Sorento I wanted. At that moment, my brother and sister-in-law saw the Sorento, and both agreed that it was significantly more spacious than the Grand Cherokee. Oh, and add insult to injury, my family friend was actually able to pull the report for the appraisal. The 2014 Grand Cherokee was purchased at $37,000, and in 1 year with 15,000 miles, had dropped in value to $18,000. No accidents, no mechanical problems, no issues with the body. Just suddenly depreciated. So much for holding their value. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 182. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, we don't have a birthday shout-out to do today, because the one for the 12th I did yesterday, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, ice cream, how do you like it served? Do you like it in bowls, in cones, or straight from the tub? Which, in my opinion, is the best way. Don't care what kind it is, I like those about 500 ml size tubs. Those are the best. For me, I don't have ice cream all the time, so for me, a 500 ml tub, watching movies, some TV shows, that's the perfect way to eat it. If I'm determined, I don't even let it melt a little bit first, just so I can get right into it. But do let me know what you think in a comment below. You may have other radical ideas, and I look forward to reading your comments. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.